Somewhere within a short walk of where you are sitting right now, there is very likely a green plant that holds roughly 5 times the magnesium of spinach. It outdelivers the capsules on the pharmacy shelf. It beats the boxed cereals they enrich and market to you as a healthy start to the day. One of these plants throws off something close to 70,000 seeds in a season, and those seeds can lie dormant in the dirt for 40 years and still wake up. When researchers examined human remains hauled out of ancient peat bogs, corpses that survived thousands of years without rotting, they discovered this very green preserved inside their guts. And despite all of that, our part of the world made a decision at some point to treat it as a nuisance, a pest, something worth dousing in chemicals and yanking out by the roots. Every year, companies rake in nearly $7 billion peddling magnesium tablets. And for all that time, the plant that outperforms those tablets has been quietly forcing its way up between paving slabs, filling the empty lots nobody tends, spreading around the fringes of parking areas, never once waiting for anyone to allow it. Stick with me to the end, and you will know precisely how a green richer than most of what fills your supermarket got branded as agriculture's public enemy, and how you can walk away from paying for magnesium for good. Let me take you somewhere unexpected first. Picture a household kitchen in the north of India when the weather turns cold. Watch how they put together the first meal of the day. They take deep green leaves coated in a pale, powdery film and turn them into curries, or press them into stuffed breads they call parathas. That is not spinach on the cutting board. It is not kale either. Their word for it is bathua, and right across South Asia, upward of 300 million people have it on the table every week and think nothing unusual about it. Head higher into the foothills of the Nepalese Himalayas, and the word shifts to bathu. The people farming those slopes count it among the foods that carry them through winter. Cross over to Turkey, and you will find country folk collecting it from wild ground, a habit handed down from their grandparents and further back still. Down in rural Mexico, the cooks know it as quilite, tucking it inside tamales and dropping it into pots of soup on the stove. And this is the first crack that hints something has gone sideways. You can name spinach, you can name kale, arugula, chard, collards. Every one of them has a reserved spot in the Western supermarket, as ordinary as bread. Yet this plant, feeding more mouths than all of those greens combined, has almost no foothold in the Western imagination. Ask around, and hardly anyone in America will recognize a single one of the many names it goes by. The whole thing unravels from the scattering of names. To an Indian, it is bathua. To a Nepalese, it is bethu. The Turks have their word, the Mexicans theirs. English farmers a few centuries ago called it fat hen, and the scientists file it under Chenopodium album. One plant carrying dozens of labels and no shared identity anywhere in the Western tongues. Strip a plant of a single steady name, and you strip it of a steady presence. It falls out of the recipe collections. It fails to show up in the reference tables. It never earns a line on a grant application. Nobody deliberately schemed to make it vanish, and yet vanish is exactly what it did. Contrast that with what happened to cilantro. It is the identical plant as coriander, only the word changes depending on whether you mean the leaf or the seed. But Western cooking reached out and fused those two words into a thing everyone instantly knows. Cilantro sits on every shelf in the land. This old green was never handed that same favor of a unified name. It showed up a stranger in every separate meeting, always unfamiliar, always misread. Then look at how the authorities have classified it, and the whole thing starts to feel ridiculous. Here is a plant sustaining hundreds of millions of people. Whole civilizations planted it on purpose across thousands of years. It also sits comfortably among the 5 most widespread agricultural weeds anywhere on the globe. Nourishment in one nation and a listed pest in the next. The identical leaves that an Indian grandmother works into supper are the leaves an American grower blasts with weed killer. To grasp how we arrived here, you have to travel a long way back. Not a handful of decades, not a few hundred years. We are talking millennia. Back in 1950, close to a small Danish village, laborers slicing peat from a marsh uncovered something that would shake up their understanding of the past. It was a human body, so intact that they phoned the authorities, sure they had come across a fresh killing. But the man had been dead over 2,400 years. His features were so well kept that you could make out his shut eyelids, the furrow of his forehead, the day's growth of beard on his jaw. He seemed like he had merely stretched out for a nap. They came to call him Tallinn Man. His stomach is what gripped the scientists most. In 2021, a team at the Danish National Museum carried out the most thorough study ever attempted on what he had eaten last. Fine microscopy and lipid work, all aimed at pinning down what had passed his lips in his final hours. Barley, a bit of flax, various wild seeds, and one plant present in far greater quantity than anything else in the mix. The same green we are circling around today. It packed his stomach. He did not see it as a weed. He saw it as a meal, gathered on purpose, harvested on purpose, eaten on purpose. He was hardly a one-off. Another body recovered from the same stretch of country repeated the pattern exactly. The same plants, the same signs of a deliberate way of eating that we had let slip out of memory entirely. What sat in the stomachs of these Iron Age people, sealed by the Piet, tells us their leaves and seeds were being collected and consumed more than 3,000 years in the past. That is not scraping by on whatever grows wild. That is farming. And the old world had no monopoly on this discovery. Roughly 5,000 miles off, a wholly separate people worked out the very same thing on their own. Along the river bottoms of eastern North America, around 5,000 years ago, native communities set about intentionally sowing and nurturing members of the goosefoot family. They chose for larger seeds. They puzzled out how to keep them. They spun trade routes around them. By something like 3,800 years back, a cluster of domesticated seed plants had knitted together into a genuine farming system running through the river valleys from present-day Missouri across to Ohio. The kin of this exact plant stood at the heart of it. Scholars name that whole arrangement the Eastern Agricultural Complex, and it predated maize drifting up from Mexico by almost 2,000 years. Across countless generations, Native American peoples grew numerous and thrived on crops that today's Americans wave off as weeds. Inside a cave in Alabama, investigators turned up the plain evidence, seeds from this plant family deliberately stockpiled and grown in an orderly fashion. This was no side dish. This was a foundation. 3 distinct regions, 3 distinct events of domestication. The Andes of South America, the high country of central Mexico, the forested east of North America. 3 unconnected civilizations studied this plant, and every one of them landed on the identical judgment. This has worth. This deserves to be cultivated. This will keep our people fed. And here comes perhaps the sharpest twist of all. You already know quinoa, the old Andean grain now fetching $8 a pound in the health food aisle. The little seed the wellness set spoons into their morning bowls. Quinoa is Chenopodium quinoa. The plant we are talking about is Chenopodium album. First cousins sharing a genus, with nutrition that runs along the same lines. Recent work that put the 2 side by side surfaced a result that caught the researchers off guard. On amino acids and general nourishment, Chenopodium album came out on top. The so-called weed edges out the celebrated superfood. The free one bests the pricey one, and next to nobody in the Western world has ever caught wind of it. The plant goes by lamb's quarters. That is what most Americans call it, Chenopodium album, and it might just be the most nourishing green nobody ever bothered to mention to you. Here is what the research actually turns up about what it holds. Take 100 grams of the raw leaves, and you cover somewhere near 96% of a day's vitamin C, close to 73% of your vitamin A, plus healthy doses of riboflavin, manganese, and calcium, and the whole thing runs you only about 43 calories. Line it up beside spinach, the darling of the nutrition crowd. Lamb's quarters brings roughly double the vitamin B1, double the B2, triple the vitamin C, and triple the calcium. Stand it next to kale, and it carries somewhere around 2.5 times the vitamin A. It runs higher on protein, higher on fiber, and richer across most of the minerals worth caring about. But the minerals are where the real prize sits. A study out of the United States Botanic Garden stacked wild edibles up against the usual grocery vegetables, testing lamb's quarters against lettuce, spinach, and cabbage. It carried better than double the potassium of those store greens, triple the calcium, and this is the number that flips everything. 5 times the magnesium, 5 times what spinach offers, 5 times lettuce, 5 times cabbage, no capsule, no powder, no costly tub with a slick label. Simply leaves coming up in flower beds and pavement gaps and scuffed up soil across 6 continents. The protein has its own tale to tell. The fresh leaves come in around 4% protein, which already tops most leafy greens. But dry down the seeds and the figures rise into territory you would look for in beans, sitting well ahead of most grains. And there is a wrinkle here that pushes the value even higher. A great many leafy greens are loaded with oxalic acid. Oxalates latch onto minerals like calcium and magnesium and shut your body out of absorbing them. Spinach has a reputation for exactly this. It dazzles on the nutrition label, but the oxalates skim off a large slice of the benefit before it ever gets to you. The research on this plant found things running the other direction. Weighing how much magnesium it packs against how its oxalate balance lands, lamb's quarters gets in the way of absorption far less than spinach or beet greens. More of what goes into your mouth genuinely reaches your cells. The supplement companies would much rather that distinction stayed foggy in your mind. They hand you isolated compounds, magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, magnesium glycinate, each absorbing at its own uneven rate, each demanding a fresh purchase the moment the container empties. Magnesium. The way a plant delivers it comes bundled with helpers, enzymes, fiber, the supporting nutrients nature meant to operate together. Your body understands how to handle food. It is far less sure what to make of a tablet. But the nutrition on its own does not account for why this plant slipped out of Western minds. The fuller answer sits in something that quietly rattles the whole money structure of modern food. One lamb's quarters plant averages around 72,000 seeds. Some push past 100,000. Given the right circumstances, researchers have clocked single plants flinging out as many as 500,000. A patch that is properly settled in can drop 50 million seeds over a single hectare. Those figures are almost impossible to picture, so let me ground it. One plant standing in your yard this summer can make enough seed to sow an entire street of houses, and you would not have to touch a thing. The plant flings its own seed around. No gathering, no keeping, no putting anything back in the ground. And this is the part that turns all that plenty into something that never stops. The seeds simply will not die. Studies on how long seeds last found lamb's quarters holding viable in the earth for anywhere from 12 to 78 years. One study still watched a third of them sprout after 20 years buried in the dark. Another turned up living seeds after 4 full decades. Your great-grandmother could have sown this one time, done absolutely nothing more, and you could be gathering from that very planting right now. The plant also molds itself to almost any conditions you hand it. It reached near total germination in comfortable warmth, but it also came up through drought, through salty ground, through exhausted soil. Loose soil, dense soil, sour, sweet, sandy, heavy clay. From freezing northern belts down through baking southern ones, from the coastline up into mountain valleys. This is what toughness genuinely looks like. Not tender seedlings pleading for care. A plant that plants its flag and keeps returning without end, asking for no infrastructure whatsoever. Now sit for a second with what that spells for the industries in place. Buy the seed one time, sow it one time, harvest for life. What becomes of a seed company's income when the crop keeps itself going? What becomes of them when the buyer never has a reason to return? The world's seed business pulls in north of $60 billion annually. Corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, every one of them needing new seed each season. Plenty of the modern types are hybrids that will not come back true. Some are patented outright, and the entire model leans on doing it again and again. Lamb's quarters shatters that model wholesale. It cannot be reined in. It cannot spin off repeat sales. From where the industry stands, that is worse than useless. That is a rival. The supplement trade faces the identical bind. The magnesium supplement market landed near $3.5 billion in 2023, with forecasts pointing to it nearly doubling by the early 2030s. All that expansion hinges on one thing holding steady: magnesium shortage. Government numbers put close to 90% of adult Americans below the recommended magnesium intake. That gap breeds demand. Demand grows markets. Markets need something to put on the shelf. A plant handing you 5 times the magnesium of spinach, coming up with no cultivation, reseeding itself forever, running you nothing once it has taken hold, undercuts every rung of that ladder. It is not merchandise, it is a fix, and fixes are ruinous for business. The way research money flows lays it out cleanly. Comb the medical literature for fish oil trials, and you turn up better than 15,000. Search magnesium supplements, and there are thousands on top of that. Now go looking for the nutritional research on Chenopodium album, and you scrape together a few hundred papers, most produced in India, Nepal, or Pakistan, nearly none backed by Western institutions. The papers keep landing on the same single word to sum it up: neglected. And neglect is a different animal from conspiracy. There were no dim back rooms, no bosses scheming to smother this plant. The machinery was plainer and colder than that. Economic systems only notice what feeds economic systems. Research trails the money. Money trails the patents. Patents demand control. And Lamb's quarters slips every grip. It reseeds itself, it wanders, it goes native, it turns free. What no one can own, no one can sell. What no one can sell, no one can advertise. And what no one advertises simply never crosses the public's mind. The weed label sealed it shut. Agricultural offices call Lamb's quarters one of the fiercer competitors in row crops, dragging down corn and soybean yields with even a light showing. Through the lens of industrial single-crop farming, that marks it an enemy. The exact qualities that make it a treasure as food make it a headache for cranking out uniform commodities. Weed killer manufacturers need something to aim at, and Lamb's quarters became a bullseye. Billions in chemistry engineered to wipe out a plant that feeds people. The same story played out with white clover. For decades, American lawn seed blends carried clover because it feeds the soil on its own. Then the herbicide firms went hunting for peacetime customers, so they lifted clover out of the blends and started selling the poison to kill the very thing they had once sold as a virtue. The cost of writing off this plant runs well past one absent nutrient. Your body leans on magnesium for over 300 enzyme-driven reactions. Muscles working, nerves firing, blood sugar steadying, blood pressure holding, protein building, energy turning over. When it drops low, the whole work starts to falter. Cramping muscles first, then a tiredness that no amount of sleep clears, then a nagging worry with no cause you can name, an unsteady heartbeat, headaches, restless nights. The signs are so common that most people simply chalk them up to being alive in these times. Doctors seldom even run the test. Routine blood work gauges the magnesium in your serum, but only around 1% of the magnesium in your body rides in the blood. The remaining 99% tucks itself into bone and soft tissue. You can be running dangerously low while the lab report comes back looking fine. Meanwhile, modern farming has been draining magnesium out of the ground for generations. Industrial fields do not put trace minerals back. Crops shoot up faster while carrying less nourishment. Studies weighing vegetables from the 1950s against today show steep drops in minerals. The spinach your grandmother sat down to held more magnesium than the bunch you carry home now. And so you get a vicious loop. Drained soil turns out drained food. Drained food turns out drained bodies. Drained bodies drum up demand for supplements, and the profits bankroll still more research into supplements. The circle keeps spinning itself. Lamb's quarters cuts across that loop because it flourishes precisely where other plants strain. It takes to poor ground. Its deep taproot dives down to draw minerals from levels that shallow-rooted vegetables can never touch. It gathers up whatever the soil is still holding on to. And in cities, where the dirt is packed hard and torn up, this plant reads opportunity where others read a dead end. It moves into construction sites. It surfaces from gravel lots. It shoulders up through cracks anywhere a little organic matter has piled in. City foragers across America have begun turning it up again. Community plots in Detroit that make room for wild edibles report pulling in hundreds of pounds a season. Out in Los Angeles, families with roots in Mexico and Central America spot quilite at a glance and quietly puzzle over why the neighbors stride straight past it. And the pattern echoes across Europe, where older folks in Poland, Germany, and Greece still hold on to how to fix it. The knowledge never really died off. It just came unhooked from the mainstream. The record shows this plant stepping forward through humanity's grimmest stretches. Amid the famines of occupied Europe in the Second World War, when the supply routes fell apart and the fields sat abandoned, lamb's quarters climbed out of the churned-up soil and fed the starving. The same thing unfolded during the Great Depression in America, when country families who still carried the old know-how went foraging for what everyone else was ignoring. In China, the records trace its use through famine after famine down the centuries, the dependable green that turned up whenever the rice crop failed. There is a lesson buried in that we have largely misplaced. Resilience is not born of complexity. It grows out of simplicity, out of plants that need nothing from us, out of food systems that keep running when the rest of it caves in. Our forebears held onto their bonds with wild plants for the plain reason that civilization now and then loses its footing. We swapped that resilience for convenience, and then we stood watching the store shelves clear out inside a few days when the pandemic struck. The heartening part is that taking this abundance back is honestly straightforward. Spotting it calls for no special training. Watch for that mealy white film on the young leaves, as though somebody scattered flour over the top. The leaves come triangular or diamond-shaped, roughly 3 to 7 centimeters long on a grown plant, with ragged little teeth along the rim. The upper leaves have a waxy look, and water rolls straight off them. That dusty coating washes away without any trouble, and beneath it the leaves look like any other cooking green. Dark up top and now and then purplish underneath. There are things it resembles, mostly a few oryx species. But here is the comforting bit. Those happen to be edible as well. Worst thing that can go wrong is you wind up with slightly saltier greens. You will not wind up poisoned. Growing it is nearly a moot point, since the plant tends to turn up in most gardens all on its own. Quit pulling it out. That is more or less the entire trick. If you would rather set up a patch on purpose, cast the seeds over disturbed soil in spring once the last frost has passed. Water here and there until it settles in, then get out of its way. Pick the young leaves while the plants stand around 6 to 8 inches, when they are at their tenderest. You can go on harvesting the whole season by taking the top growth, and fresh leaves come back within days. The young shoots do fine raw, tossed into a salad, with a mild, faintly mineral taste, and a whisper of spinach. The leaves are better cooked, and you handle them just as you would spinach. Fry them up with garlic, drop them into soups, fold them through an omelet, blend them into a smoothie. For seed, hold off until late summer or fall when the seed heads darken and dry. Strip the clusters into a container and winnow gently in a breeze so the chaff carries off. Toast the cleaned seeds before eating, or grind them into flour, or simmer them into porridge. A quick word on preparing it. Like spinach, lamb's quarters carries oxalates. For most people, that raises no concern at all. But if kidney stones worry you or you intend to eat it in big amounts regularly, a short blanch knocks the level down. Pour boiling water over the leaves, let them rest a couple of minutes, then drain them off. Keep the dried seeds in a sealed container and they hold good for years. That is your hedge against a shaky future. Seeds that call for no electricity, no supply chain, no store still open for business, only dry storage and a little patience. Give a thought to what food security really comes down to. Store shelves can empty inside hours when trouble hits. Supply chains stretch clear across oceans and hang on fuel, power, and stable governments. The average meal logs more than 1,500 miles before it lands on your plate, and every link along that road is a spot where it can snap. Now picture the reverse. Food that comes up without replanting, nourishment that costs nothing, seeds that bide their time underground for decades, a harvest that grows back within days of the cut. That is not some daydream, that is lamb's quarters. And the climate crisis only sharpens how much this matters. Droughts are digging in deeper across farm country. Heat waves are flattening the usual crops. Water tables are sinking and irrigation keeps getting pricier. Lamb's quarters comes into its own under exactly these strains, with its tolerance for heat, its resistance to drought, its knack for growing in weak soil. This plant was shaped for the world we are busy building. Every garden keeping a patch of it holds a small policy against uncertain harvests. So the honest question is not whether you ought to grow lamb's quarters. It grows itself. The question is whether you will know it when it shows up, whether your eye lands on food or on a weed. 3,000 years back, a man in Denmark ate this plant as his last meal, and his preserved body tells us what he prized. 5,000 years back, Native American farmers raised its relatives as a staple. That knowledge was never genuinely lost. Indian grandmothers still cook it every winter. Himalayan villagers still gather it off the slopes. Mexican cooks still fold it into their dishes. The wisdom held on everywhere except where industrial farming and supplement marketing seized total control. The supplement industry is not about to tell you about this plant. There is no money in steering you toward free nourishment. The seed industry will not push it, because you cannot sell an annual product when a single sowing lasts forever. The agricultural establishment will not sing its praises, because you cannot spray weed killer on a food crop. But the seeds do not read the market reports. They have been lying in your soil for decades, waiting on a little disturbance, waiting on light, waiting on someone to stop poisoning them and start harvesting them instead. They have been waiting 40 years. The one real question left is whether you will be ready when they finally decide to come up. If this kind of buried knowledge is what brings you here, subscribe to the channel and come along for the next one.